When I was a little girl, I had a strange friend that I believed I had made up until about an hour ago. My father and mother were out of the house a lot when I was a kid. It never really occurred to me that we were poor, but looking back, I realized that we must have been. Mom worked 2 jobs, serving in a restaurant, driving a bus for the school. Dad worked in a fish market during the day so he could attend school in the evenings. Both of them would come home every night, very late, and most of the time I was already in bed. They'd just flop down for a few hours before they had to get up and do it again. They were never cruel to us, they just didn't have time for my older brother and I. Mom and Dad got together in high school, and Mom's senior year photos show a swell of her belly as she carried my brother. They were parents before they were really more than kids themselves, and with no real skills, they had to take whatever jobs they could to keep food on the table. For the first 10 years of my life, there wasn't really a lot of happiness. There were no Christmas mornings, there weren't a lot of birthday presents, and I lacked the parental involvement that a lot of my peers seemed to have. That was probably what led me to create Mr. Gozo. My brother was supposed to be watching me after school. I've talked about my brother a little bit, but I don't think I've told you much about him really. He was 8 years older than me, a senior in high school, who was supposed to be my caretaker while my parents were out of the house. This usually translated to him being in his room with the door closed, or him leaving the house and telling me not to answer the door or go outside. This meant that I spent a lot of time alone as a kid, but I much preferred the time when he left me alone. My brother was more than a neglectful babysitter. He could be really mean and seemed to delight in tormenting me. If he was gone, then it was just me and Mr. Gozo with the house to ourselves. Mr. Gozo was a friend that I discovered living in my house one day. He was tall, taller than my dad even, and had a strange, whispery voice that always used to make me laugh. He wore grown-up clothes, a long coat and a pair of suit pants with square-toed cowboy boots sticking out from underneath them. His head was round and pale, his eyes always seemed a little too big for his face, and he didn't have any ears, which I found very funny as a kid. His smile was my favorite thing about him, because it reminded me of the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. Something else about him that always reminded me of that cat was that he would disappear whenever anyone else was around. One minute we'd be having a tea party or playing hide and seek, and the next my brother would come home and Mr. Gozo would just vanish. I told my parents about him, but they just smiled and said it was good that I had such an active imagination. My brother said I was a little freak and told me to stay out of his way. Mr. Gozo did not like my brother.
He is a brute. He knows nothing of imagination.
We played a lot, Gozo and I, but I remember his favorite game was hide and seek. He would never beat me though. I was an excellent hider. He would clump around for a while before finally saying I'd won, and I would burst out and wrap my arms around his leg. Despite never winning, he always wanted to play. He seemed to like chasing me through the house, and when I think back on it these days, I see how lucky I was to never have learned anything to the contrary. You see, Mr. Gozo would always make these little bets before we started playing hide and seek.
If I can't find you, then I will get you whatever you desire. But if I win, then you must come back to my house to play.
Of course, I would always agree. I was 10 and very good at hiding. When I say he never found me, I mean he never found me. I would hide under things that were too hard for him to lift, or hide in places that were too small for him to get into. I would camouflage myself with blankets and pillows, and I could remain absolutely still and quiet for quite some time. Mr. Gozo would try his hardest, stomping around as his 2 big eyes roved everywhere. Eventually, he would just give up and tell me I had won. He always made good on his promises, too. I've watched Sailor Moon or Powerpuff Girls in the middle of the night long after Cartoon Network stopped showing cartoons, and I've eaten chocolate ice cream and pizza when we barely had groceries in the house. Much like Mr. Gozo, though, if my brother came home early, he couldn't see the food, or the show, or the new toy that Mr. Gozo had given me. I would turn back to find an empty plate or a staticky TV, and Mr. Gozo would be nowhere to be found. Mr. Gozo would play anything I wanted, but he asked to play hide and seek at least once a day. If I said I didn't want to, he never pushed the issue. He also never let losing deter him from playing. It appeared that whatever he wanted to do with me at his house could wait. He was a perfect companion for a lonely child, and I never saw his more sinister side until I looked back after the incident. Not until the hide and seek when I lost my brother. It was late, probably after 11 o'clock, and Mr. Gozo and I were playing hide and seek, as we did most every day. I kept stumping him, even after hours of playing, but this looked like the time he was finally going to win. I was hiding beneath the couch cushions, compressing myself in a divot under the middle cushion where the springs were sagging. I could see him searching for me between the small gap in the cushions, and Mr. Gozo was looking desperately. He had lost 8 times in a row, and I could see that his patience was starting to deteriorate. He was pushing things aside, rustling the curtains, and pushing the pillows off the couch roughly as he searched for me. As the pillows hit the floor, I must have moved slightly, because he turned those much too expressive eyes back to the couch. They zeroed in on the cushion, and I knew that Gozo was about to win. He wrapped his long, sinuous fingers around the cushion, grinning as he prepared to lift it up. I tried to stifle a laugh as I prepared to be found. Just then, keys rattled in the door, and I saw Mr. Gozo turn his head to look. I looked too, and when I turned back, he was gone. My brother walked into the living room, and as I climbed out from under the couch, I could smell him before I saw him. He'd come home like this a few times, smelling sour and like the chemicals Mom kept under the sink, and he sighed in disgust as he looked at the house. I hadn't expected him to be back so soon, and Mr. Gozo had been a little rough in his searching the last few times. There were pillows and blankets on the ground, the curtains were open, and there were books scattered around, as well as magazines on the floor. The living room was a mess, and as I climbed from the couch, he asked me what the hell I had done. Nothing, I said timidly. Mr. Gozo and I were just playing hide and seek. My brother rolled his eyes. Mr. Gozo, Mr. Gozo, Mr. Gozo. He slurred the name as he said it, stumbling a little as he flopped onto the couch. I am so sick of hearing about that stupid freak. Clean up this crap before Mom and Dad get home, and yell at me for it. I started picking up, feeling him watching me as I moved around. He was acting weird, weirder than usual, and he was making me uncomfortable as he sat staring on the couch. I cleaned up the books, the magazines, put the blankets back on the quilt rack, and closed the curtains. As I went to put the pillows on the couch, I looked into his eyes and saw something I hadn't seen there before. It wasn't love, I knew what that looked like, but it was different from anything else I'd ever seen. I didn't like it, and when he caught my wrist and pulled me towards him, I squirmed and tried to get away. Let go, you're hurting me, I said, trying to keep the whine out of my voice. If I whined, it would only egg him on. Don't be such a... He burped, and I could smell the pungent brew. Such a party pooper. Come on and sit with your big brother. I struggled, pulling against him as he tried to pull me onto his lap. He was acting really weird, and my brain screamed at me that I did not want him to get his hands on me. I looked around, looking for Mr. Gozo for help, and saw him peeking from the hallway. His expressive face told me that he wanted to help, but he didn't know how. There seemed to be a sort of duality about him, a want to help his friends, but a knowledge that such a thing would be unwise. My brother swore at me, yanking on my arm and telling me to stop being such a cold bitch. Just like that bitch at the party, he mumbled, yanking hard and almost pulling me off my feet. Suddenly, though, I knew how I could get him to stop. There was a way that Gozo could help me. I can't play right now, big brother. I'm playing with Mr. Gozo. He'll get mad if we don't finish the game. I saw him sneer, but I also saw something else there. My brother pretended he wasn't a little weirded out by Mr. Gozo, but I could tell that the idea of an invisible friend kind of freaked him out. He had seen the pictures I drew of him, and I couldn't help but notice the shudder they elicited in him sometimes. When he was wobbly, like he was tonight, he was especially nervous about Mr. Gozo, and I decided to take advantage of that to get away. You played with him long enough, he said, his grip tightening. Why don't you come play in my room? I've got some new games I want to show you. I shook my head. Mr. Gozo will get mad. I have to finish my game. I turned back to the hallway and saw him shaking his head, begging me not to go on, but I pressed my luck. But if you play with us and finish the game, then I'd be done and we could play, I guess. I tried to stay calm, but his touch was making me nervous, his sweaty hands making my skin crawl. My brother looked thoughtful for a moment and let my arm slip out of his hand. Okay, one more game with Mr. Gozo, and then it's our turn to play, right? His smile made me want to run out into the night and never come back. Right. You hide and I'll hide while Mr. Gozo counts. Go hide so he doesn't find you. My brother got up, wobbling a little, and went down the hall. I turned to go hide too, and that's when I heard Mr. Gozo's voice.
Please don't do this. You could just come with me. He can't hurt you where we're going.
I turned around and saw Mr. Gozo towering over me, his eyes looking sorrowful as his mouth held in a frown. Count to 100, Mr. Gozo. If you find me first, I'll go with you, but if you find him first, he has to go with you. We looked at each other for a count of 10 before he put his hands over his eyes, and I ran off to hide. I went in the kitchen, having a perfect place in mind, as I heard Mr. Gozo's count reach 15. I opened the cabinet beneath the sink and squeezed in, not sure if I would still fit. I had found this spot a while ago, seeing the small space beside it once you were under the sink, and marked it for future use. I knew it would be too small for Mr. Gozo, or my brother, to squeeze into, and they would have a hard time seeing me in the little space between the drawers and the wall. I squeezed in there, pulling the drawers back in as I inadvertently nudged them, and pressed myself as flat as I could against the wall. Even if my brother got bored and came to find me, he'd never find me here. I breathed very shallowly and stifled my gasp as I heard Gozo's count reach 100. Then, the game began. It started out normally, Gozo seeking and me hiding. He checked beneath things, he checked under things, but the gravity of the game began to shift very quickly. Gone was the playful talk as he tried to find me. Gone was the playful way he looked. Now he was shoving things over, pushing them around, and it sounded like he was tearing the house apart. He moved into the kitchen, glasses breaking and things on the counter being pushed onto the floor. This wasn't like him. Why was he acting like this? I shivered in my hiding place, waiting to be found or for him to move on. I heard the table flip over, the face of the microwave shatter as it hit the ground, and the floor groan as the refrigerator was pushed over, its guts spilling everywhere. Mr. Gozo called my name, his normally happy voice cracking with sorrow and anger. I wanted to go to him then, wanted to wrap my arms around him and comfort my old friend, but I didn't dare leave my cubby. I would stay hidden all night if I needed to. A part of me now feared Gozo as much as I feared my brother.
Come out! Come out! It's not too late. You can still...
What in the hell is going on in here? I heard my brother yelling, could almost picture him in the doorway to the kitchen, and I eased out of the cubby and moved a shaky hand towards the door of the cabinet. I heard Gozo's heavy boots as he stepped towards him, my brother asking who he was and what the hell he was doing in our house. He was slurring and shouting. Mr. Gozo was silent as the grave as he walked towards him. I pushed the corner of the cabinet open, just a little bit, and looked out of the crack, seeing the two long legs as they walked towards my suddenly scared brother. I was looking between his ankles as he walked. He had been so close to my hiding place that he might have heard the silverware shivering in the drawers if I had started shaking any harder.
My name is Mr. Gozo, and I believe that you have been found.
My brother screamed as Mr. Gozo blocked him from sight, and I pulled myself back into the cubby and sat shuddering as he went right on yelling in terror. I stayed there until my parents came home an hour later and called the police. They had many questions, the police and my parents. I told them that I'd been playing with Mr. Gozo when my brother had come home. He was acting weird, so I said he should play hide and seek with us, so I could hide from him. He was trying to get me to do things that made me feel weird, so I hid, and then Mr. Gozo had wrecked the house looking for him. When my brother came to see what all the noise was about, Mr. Gozo had taken him away, and I had hidden in my spot while he screamed. The police officer didn't understand what I was talking about with all the Mr. Gozo stuff, but when he asked my parents if they had a son, they just shook their head. No, she's always been an only child. I could have sworn we called a sitter for her since we knew we wouldn't be home till late. Didn't you hire a sitter? Dad asked Mom. Mom just shook her head. I thought you had. They both, however, had this dreamy look on their face, confusion mixed with embarrassment, like when you walk into a room and forget why you came there. It probably seems weird to you that I keep calling my brother by his title and not his name. It's because, as I saw my parents looking so confused, I realized that I didn't know his name either. I remembered that I'd had a brother, in that vague way that you remember that when you were 6 you had a pet, but not exactly what happened to it. But I couldn't remember his name. He was gone from all the family photos. His name was gone from any journal entry or class assignment I had wrote on it, and no one remembered him at all. It was as though he never existed, and even now, I can't remember what he looks like or what his voice sounded like. I only remember that he existed, and he's gone. I wonder often if that's what happened when Mr. Gozo caught you. The police had a lot of questions after that, and it was finally agreed upon that I had been the victim of a break-in and hidden from the intruders. They hadn't found me, so they had left after a while, and I was extremely lucky, they said. The police agreed to check the house, but found nothing. My parents said they would check their valuables, but never reported anything missing. Mr. Gozo had only taken one thing, and they couldn't remember that it had even existed to start with. They sent me to bed, telling me to get some sleep while they cleaned up the mess, and that's when I saw Mr. Gozo for the last time. I was lying in bed that night, listening to my parents talk about how they needed to be more careful about leaving someone here with me, when I suddenly felt his eyes on me. I rolled over to see his sad face, his heavy eyes full of sorrow, and his too big mouth turned down into a frown. I also saw the speckles of blood on his normally so clean coat, and the small, hesitant smile lying just below the surface as he gauged my reaction to him. Go away, Mr. Gozo. I don't want to play with you anymore.
I made him go away. I made him stop hurting you. I showed you what I was so you could be safe, and now you want me gone?
I rolled over, looking at him and yelling, "Go away, Gozo!"
Say it again. Say it thrice, and I'll never darken your door again.
Go away, Gozo, I almost whispered, hearing my parents stop talking downstairs. He evaporated like a fine mist, and I never saw him again. Well, until today. I'm a grown-up now, married with a girl of my own, and I haven't thought about Mr. Gozo until just a few hours ago. I was putting away laundry when I found my 4-year-old hiding in the towel closet. Emily apparently got her father's hiding genes, because a blind man could have found her hiding under that pile of towels. She squealed as I found her, but then looked grumpy and told me to close the door before he found her. "Who?" I asked, smiling at her as I lifted her into my arms. "Mr. Gozo," Emily said, and my blood ran cold. She took me to her room when I asked who that was and showed me pictures. He wears the same long coat, the same straight black pants. She even drew the square-toed boots that stick out from beneath them. She captured his face in a way that I never could have as a child. His pale oval face, his almost cartoonishly large eyes, his smiling mouth of pointed teeth, and his distinct lack of ears. His head is still shaved, but she's drawn him with a large top hat, an eye floating in its middle. The eye is blue. Were my brother's eyes maybe blue? She's in my room now, with me, whining because she can't finish her game with Mr. Gozo. Sometimes I feel like I can see him out of the corner of my eye as I write this, his wide smile predatory. I don't know what to do. I can see Emily talking to him in the mirror, his 2 large forms sitting on the bed as he listens to her. Every now and again, though, I see those 2 big eyes of his glance over at me, knowing me and seeing me for who I am. I want to take my daughter and run, but I don't know how he will react to such a move. Perhaps I can offer him one last game. Perhaps I can finally give him what he always wanted. Perhaps I can save my daughter, as my big brother inadvertently saved me all those years ago. I have to try, don't I?
Good evening, my little creeperonis. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. It's time once again to thank our patrons. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. We just couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to be one of our contributors, come on down to Patreon. We've got plenty of tiers. I'm sure there's one that'll suit you. And as always, you can always pick up a book on Amazon. I have 4 now. Might I suggest Stragview Stories? It's a collection of prison short stories that I think are pretty good. Considering that I spent 4 years working in a prison, I've got a lot of technical know-how about how spooky prisons can be. And as always, I hope you'll join us next time for more stories. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.